happy to be here on this election day.
It is finally here. We can stop talking about the polls and talk about polls opening and closing and finally have some results.
Yeah, that'll be nice, huh? We'll actually see if those polls were accurate or not. That's always the big question. So after months of anticipation, here we are. Today is the election day in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, a lot at stake here. The Democrats trying to flip the Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor's seats in the Commonwealth. We're going to be covering all these races over the course of the morning. Haley Milon out at the polls looking at the AG's race. Max Marcella going to tell us how voters are feeling about the governor and lieutenant governor's races.
But before we head over to the polls, let's get some more insight on these races with the Hill's Julia Manchester. Hiya, Julia.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys.
Of course, thank you for being here. So you've been following this the whole way. Here we are. Let's start in Virginia, of course, with the governor's race.
Yeah, look, Abigail Spanberger has a very, very clear lead. I think most polls show her anywhere between 6 and 12 points. Some news was made, or lack of news was made last night during a tele-rally President Trump had for Virginia Republicans, Virginia voters. And he, interestingly enough, did not mention Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears on that call. Over the past few days, he's been issuing a number of 2026 endorsements, a flood of them on Truth Social, but nothing for Winsome Earle-Sears yet. He and Governor Glenn Youngkin were very much praising Attorney General Jason Miyares in that tele-rally. And that brings us to the Attorney General race, which I think really is the most watched race in Virginia this cycle because of that texting scandal involving Jay Jones. So I think the big question is what happens there.
Yeah. What does Miyares need in order to win? We've seen polls where he's been up. More recent polls show Jay Jones has maintained the lead. What does Miyares need to happen today to get over the hump?
Well, Miyares needs a number of independent voters to either split their ticket or, vote for him, vote, down ballot Republican. He also could probably use some Democratic voters, either sitting it out, writing in someone, or even crossing over to Jason Miyares. Now, the question is, how long are Abigail Spanberger's coattails? A lot of recent polling would suggest that they are long enough to get Jay Jones over the finish line. I think one thing we have to remember is all of us in the political media space, we talk about this. This is obviously a big story, and there certainly are voters who are tuned into it. But there are also voters who may not be as tuned into it as we would think, or you would think if you're in this space, because they have lives outside of politics. So
imagine.
Imagine. So when they go to the polls, it's easier to just vote down ballot, vote Democratic, or they might say, look, if we have an Attorney General, Jason Miyares, a Governor Abigail Spanberger, who's going to be that defense legally against the Trump administration, there is a theory that would say that Democrats would be willing to put in Jay Jones because of that argument.
But just the fact that it's been a close race. I mean, Jason Miyares is an incumbent, so people know him. He's got the support of President Trump. A kind of endorsement every Republican really wants to get, and yet it's been a struggle, and we don't know which way it's going to go.
We don't, and it was always going to be one of the closer races. It wasn't going to be this close necessarily, but like you said, Attorney General Jason Miyares has the fundraising, he has the status as an incumbent, he has that established public profile. Jay Jones does as well. He's a former delegate, comes from a political family in Virginia, but maybe not to the same extent as Jason Miyares. So it was always going to be closer, but I don't think anyone predicted it was going to be this close or really this contentious.
The AG's race, not the only one that's a little scandal-ridden. The lieutenant governor's race, John Reed had some issues at the very beginning of this race. Ultimately, do you think that's going to matter for voters, or was it so long ago that it's kind of in the rearview and no one's really thinking about it?
I think it was so long ago, but also it was so inside baseball for Virginia Republicans, in particular Virginia Republicans who are active in Republican circles in Virginia. So I don't think they're necessarily thinking of that. To be fair, last night on that tele-rally, President Trump didn't mention John Reed either. However, to be frank, voters aren't necessarily always paying attention to the lieutenant governor's race or even the attorneys general races in these, down ballot races. The attorneys general race, though, is different because of this scandal.
It's Are the Virginia races more important and more indicative of the nation at large than, let's say, New Jersey?
I don't think so, not necessarily. I think they're probably equally that way. I mean, two very different populations, but at the same time, I think populations that both reflect various parts of the country. I would say both Virginia and New Jersey are more indicative than, let's say, New York City, for example, or even California. But, you know, I think looking at New Jersey, and this was the case in 2021, I covered Virginia very closely in 2021, it was actually New Jersey that ended up being the real nail biter. We could see that happen again this time, but I think both states have urban, suburban, rural areas that are reflective of the country as a whole.
What are those key issues that you think are going to ultimately decide who voters ultimately vote for today?
Well, President Trump is trying to make this about energy costs, not only in New Jersey, but also in Virginia. He was doing that very much on the call last night. Abigail Spanberger, Democrats really looking to zero in on this issue of costs and affordability and how it hasn't improved under President Trump. But Winsome Earle-Sears, the lieutenant governor, has taken a different approach. She seems to be trying to take a page out of Governor Glenn Youngkin's 2021 playbook by focusing on cultural issues, education issues. Some of those issues include trans students, trans bathroom policies in schools, for example. But we don't know how that's necessarily going to translate. I think Youngkin focused on maybe a slightly different issue set in 2021. We were also in a different moment because we were coming out of a pandemic. Right now, poll after poll shows that those culture issues are not top of mind for most voters. It's cost and affordability.
But the shutdown is.
It is.
And we can talk more about that a little later.
Yes, definitely.
Julie Manchester,
Thanks, Julia.
going to be a busy day for you.
Thank
Drink a lot of
you.
coffee. We appreciate your time.
You.
So the Virginia's governor's race has historic significance, right? No matter who wins, the Commonwealth going to get its first female governor.
Sunrise's Max Marcilla joins us live from Fairfax County. And Max, beyond the historic nature of the race, there are several big issues on the minds of voters. We've discussed some of them, but why don't you break them down?
Yeah, well, you guys mentioned a big one just now, the government shutdown. One of the voters we spoke with this morning who came out to cast their ballot talked about that, but that is just one of a number of sort of side issues, because at the heart of this election, according to the polls, is the economy. The latest survey from Emerson College and The Hill shows that about 2 out of every 5 voters, their main priority, their main issue is the economy. That includes jobs, that also includes inflation and taxes. Here's what's interesting. The Democratic candidate, Abigail Spanberger, actually leads by about 8 percentage points over her Republican challenger, Winsome Earle-Sears, when it comes to the issue of the economy. Also worth mentioning are some of the other issues that voters indicated were important, things like threats to democracy, healthcare, immigration, and education. That rounds out the top 5. We spoke with a couple voters this morning. Here's what they say brought them to the ballot box.
I want to make sure that the school system in Virginia remains as strong as it has always been, so that my daughter can get a good, education.
I want to see them restore a sense of community, coming together and working towards common goals, making sure that no one's left behind economically or socially.
Now, so far, thousands of Virginians have already voted, as early voting has been underway since about mid-September, but you still have a chance to vote. In fact, you have about 12 hours, and as long as you are in line by 7 o'clock, you can cast your ballot.
Max, let's get back to the history that's going to be made today. Are voters saying anything about that, and maybe that being part of why they came to the polls?
Yeah, they are. I mean, one voter we spoke with, Corey, said it's not going to determine who they vote for, but it is something that voters have in mind, the historic nature of the first woman governor in Virginia. Take a listen to what some voters told us.
I think women have not had the kind of platforms that men have traditionally had through the years, and I think it's important to bring that balance and that voice.
Hopefully it happens more in the future. That's what I hope that it happens. It makes it easier for everyone to happen.
And the governor's race is not the only one where history will be made. For the lieutenant governor's race, we have the Democrat Ghazala Hashmi, who would be the first Muslim woman elected to statewide office in the country. And then on the Republican side, John Reed would be the first openly gay Republican elected to statewide office, again, in the entire country. So a lot of history to be made tonight in the Commonwealth.
All righty, Max Marcelo, thank you very much. See you later.